Hey, Lighthouse. Well, it's Friday. Let's have a conversation. Love to have some more questions from you. Questions at lighthousebaptist.net is the address to send those questions at lighthousebaptist.net. Today is a good one to think about. Matthew 23:9. In this chapter, Jesus is exposing Phariseeism, and he tells the disciples and the multitudes not to call anyone on earth rabbi, teacher, father, or leader. I assume this is in the spiritual sense because he, Christ, is our only teacher, father, and leader. How does this apply to us today? That's an awesome question. I think it applies to us today in a couple of really important ways. And to sum it up, I think if we are leaders, we should not be those who are receiving the glory ourselves, but rather we should be those who are constantly pointing people to Christ, that we would not take unnecessary titles. Go get your doctorate, have a great time. But even as we study, as we are ordained, as we are commissioned in churches, that it would always be not that we are taking the impressive, we want the glory of man, we're taking those titles to build us up. Rather, we're receiving the responsibility of the pointing people to Jesus. We're taking the responsibility of those stations, of those positions of authority, not that we would have power over people, but that rather that we would take the responsibility of shepherding people. And then on the other side of it too, it is really easy to mistake the medium for the message, or the messenger for God. So, man, probably most of us at some time have had a pastor, have had a teacher, have had a mentor that we just thought the world of. And it's easy to get our eyes off of Jesus and onto that leader. And there are some leaders that'll let you do it, that enjoy being puffed up, enjoy being built up, enjoy being the one you are following. And so I think those of us who sit under pastors, under teachers, under leaders of any kind, that we need to be very careful not to worship them, not to be followers of theirs. You remember Paul saying, man, follow me as I follow Christ. So anybody who's ever following a leader, that leader needs to have it in their mind that the only reason somebody should follow them is so they can have an example of what it means to follow Jesus. Never that that worship or love of a human would overtake or get in the way of in any way love and worship of God. Okay, so let's work through this passage a little bit. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 23 of the book of Matthew, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but they do not practice. Man, Jesus here is telling his Jewish brothers and sisters to honor the position of the spiritual leaders of Israel, even though the spiritual leaders of Israel are a bunch of hypocrites. So practice what they preach, because they're teaching you good things as they teach you the law. But I want you to notice that they don't live those good things out. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. So again, they are insisting people live legalistic lives, but they themselves are unwilling to live the lives that they are teaching other people. They do all, did I skip something? Nope. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. For they make phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and to the best seats in the synagogue, and greetings in marketplaces, and being called rabbi by others. So I think what we're getting at here is there's nothing inherently wrong about calling somebody a leader, calling somebody a pastor, calling somebody even a spiritual father or a rabbi. And yet it's the sense in which those words were being used around Jesus at the time he's teaching this. So people called Jesus rabbi. There were other rabbis around. Jesus is he's the appropriate one to call rabbi. He is our teacher. And yet I don't think there was anything inherently sinful about using the word rabbi. And yet these leaders, these first century Second Temple, in and around Jerusalem, rabbis, scribes, Pharisees, what they wanted was not to tell people about God. What they wanted was the glory for themselves. They loved to be welcomed in the marketplace. They loved to get the best seat in the synagogue. They loved to have those symbols, to be in the best suit on Sunday morning, and to have the name badge that says, "Oh yes, I am the pastor of this church." Jesus says, man, sell it to the tourists. What we as leaders need to be doing is pointing people to Christ and not pointing people to our own glory. So while the word rabbi, there's nothing wrong with that, Jesus certainly wants it to be used in a way that is not bringing glory to anyone except God. But they are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And I think that's the heart of the matter there. Of course, these men went on to instruct other people. Jesus gave them the mission of going and training people, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and make disciples out of people all over. And so, of course, there's instruction there. Of course, they were to be the leaders of the church. And yet, Jesus sums up his teaching here and says, look, humility is what's going to matter. You can't puff yourself up with these labels like rabbi or father or instructor or teacher. Rather, humbly do the work of being an instructor. Humbly do the work of being a shepherd. And don't get caught up on the title. So while I do think we have to say, let's not build a new legalism. Let's not build a new legalism and say, oh, we can't use these words. The human heart is so depraved, we would come up with new words and mess it up just as badly. But rather we say the teaching here is eyes off of people, eyes onto Jesus. If you're a leader, be sure you're doing all you can to keep eyes off of you and onto Jesus. And if you are young in the faith and you're sitting under a ministry and there's a pastor in your life, then man, appreciate that guy, appreciate that woman, and yet follow Jesus alone. All right, Lighthouse, be loved.